Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who's just not going to let this yogurt go to waste.
Tim Longo. Wow, that was a quick one.
Yeah, I called an audible there. I had another one in place, and
I'm
just picking on. Tim gets home and is eating normally while we're doing our pre-show, and tonight I could tell. I picked up that he was scraping the bottom of a yogurt container from the sounds it made over the microphone. I'd like to teach a little bit. Good Foley though, man. Good Foley.
Yeah, it was all fake. I'm actually not eating yogurt. It was just to give you the impression of that.
Yeah, that's very good. Well done. I mean, in the same way as all those noises in Silent Hill 2 were not really there. They were just meant to scare us.
Nice.
I'm just about what you managed to eat.
Nice callback.
Yeah.
We're moving on. Moving on past that terrifying but very good game. I really enjoyed.
Right.
Really
and
enjoyed
we'll revisit a little bit in the emails.
Yeah, I forgot to maybe in the emails we can get to it all if you remind me. I forgot to tell you my theory about the red squares.
Yes, when I did the production, I was like, "Oh yeah, he never came back to that."
Yeah, I forgot.
So I'll put that right at the top, and we can talk about it at the beginning.
Yeah.
So that I noticed that. So I'll make a little show note there. Okay, so we are turning ourselves, of course, now to 1996's Super Mario 64. Which, as far as I can tell, was the first 3D platformer. I'm sure I'm missing something, but nothing obvious as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, it's the age-old. Those who let's see, how do you put this? The ones who innovate are given credit for innovations are the ones that people remember. It may not actually be the one who did it first,
Right.
And the age-old example of that is the active reload, or not actively reload, but the cover-based mechanic in Gears of War, which Kill Switch did first, but no one ever remembers Kill Switch, and Gears gets that's the example.
Well, and it's often because someone. It may not even be that someone does it better, but maybe they integrate it more fully.
Yeah,
and
more fully realized. Yeah,
exactly. Here, this is a fully fledged playing this and playing some of Super Mario Odyssey at the same time. Although there's a lot of improvements in polish and feel of the controls, and in particular the camera, which is something I'm sure we'll talk a lot about. It's surprising how much of it is there in 1996, and 20 years later. It hasn't changed too much.
Yeah, and in this case, I think to your point, they both fully realized it, and they were nearly the first, so it's not really that they didn't steal the innovation from somebody else per se. And one little, I mean, I guess I'll hit it later when we get into camera more deeply, but I have a little story to tell from somebody that relayed, Fred Marcus, who is a colleague of mine from the past, and he, I guess, had interfaced with Miyamoto directly or with Nintendo, and they had talked about the development of this camera, and I have a little story to tell about that. But yeah, they were trailblazing, basically, right? The crux of the N64 was Nintendo going into 3D, and of course, you need to bring Mario into 3D too?
Absolutely.
And I do remember at the time, so. We talked about in pre-show, Tomb Raider came out this year. And when this was also the year that I started in game development, and Shadows of the Empire was being developed.
Right. Yep.
And that was a near launch title for N64 as well. So it was being developed at LucasArts. And so I was doing a little bit of testing on that. And that was obviously
interesting connection there. The person who is said to have written the book on 3D cameras is Mark Hay Hutchinson, and I literally mean the book because he wrote a book. Sadly, Mark's no longer with us, but he was the project lead on Shadows of the Empire, and went from LucasArts to a little studio named Retro Studios to work on the Metroid Prime series.
Yeah.
And his work in 3D cameras, I've seen him cited numerous times. Not of course in connection with Super Mario 64 because he was at LucasArts at the time, but certainly in other things, literally with people saying things like, "This is the man who wrote the book about the 3D camera," especially in these sort of action game contexts.
Yeah.
Speaking of context, we have talked about 1996 before, and I want to say why did we talk about 1996? Oh, because we played Resident Evil, right? So this was the year of the Nintendo 64 launch, and Super Mario 64 was a launch title. But other titles that year, and I'll stick to the 3D ones mostly. Quake,
yeah, right,
a big one. Also on the PlayStation, you have Crash Bandicoot, which is another third-person camera of a totally different type.
I don't remember that. Yeah, you have to refresh my memory on that camera. I don't remember.
Sort of a traveling fixed camera where you're running either into or away from the screen and the path is unfolding.
Well, like an early runner.
Basically, it's like an early runner, but not side scrolling. It's forward and back scrolling. So into the screen or towards the screen. It is an intense thing. I played it a couple of years ago.
I didn't play that. Yeah, I didn't play that.
And Tomb Raider, of course, as you already mentioned. I think those are the big 3D titles, true 3D titles. There's also a little title called Blood Omen: Legacy of Kain.
Oh, the original.
Worth noting.
I
believe so.
Yeah,
yes.
Right. Which was an isometric top-down originally. It wasn't like Soul Reaver.
Exactly. Different sort of game. But I think maybe also a primitive 3D renderer. I'm not really sure about that. I think it must have been. And of course, other N64 and PlayStation titles. But I think those are, if you want to touch on the big touch points of that year, as far as 3D starting to come into its own, that's where you begin. We'll come back, I think, in a later episode about the Nintendo 64's hardware. I have a story of my own to tell about that, but I don't think this episode. I think we'll have enough to talk to just getting into this game.
Yeah,
it came out in September of the year in North America, and in June in Japan. The launches were actually fairly close together. I don't think they're ever that close together anymore. Although on occasion, I guess they're now worldwide. Which didn't used to be a thing. It used to be 9 months in between Japan and the U.S., but here we're just a few months apart, really. And it really made a big impact pretty quickly. I think people knew right away that it was something special, and it remains one of the best-selling Mario titles in the main series. So I think that's all I'm going to say to sort of situate it. I think people know this title by reputation. We've already played a Super Mario game in Super Mario World, which was a 2D title and maybe the apex of that particular format. So I want to throw over to you, picking up on moving from 2D to 3D. Was that transition for you easy in this case? I know you're not generally a platformer player.
Yeah.
And do you feel like you learned anything from the 2D version that you were able to carry forward to the 3D version?
That's an interesting question. I guess the only thing I've been surprised by, because I dabbled in this game back when it came out, but not very much. And as I think I've already said, I definitely never finished it. And in fact, already self-proclaimed to not be a big Mario fan or a platformer fan in general. So even like Galaxy or I played a little bit of all of them, but never really stuck. The one thing I guess that's surprising me about this transition is separate from even the 3D and the camera, but how they were trying to translate. Because on the Super Mario World episodes, we talked a lot about the tuning and balancing and physics / I guess I'll just say physics model behind the way that Mario runs and is tuned. You know what I mean? When it comes to his momentum and the way that how sticky he is or is not to the ground when he lands, and how you can chain moves together and all those things. And I guess I'm surprised at how much they've tried to, I feel like, emulate that momentum in 3D, because he really, it takes a bit to ramp him up. You have to account for that momentum. When he lands, it's not always clean, so you kind of have to or I haven't figured out a way to make it super clean. I think there's probably things I can do to get better at that. But just the way that he feels when he moves, separate from camera stuff and such. But that was, I guess, an unexpected part of the transition for me playing this one, because it was a challenge for everybody. I mean, Tomb Raider had its own challenges in this regard, obviously, and we would talk a lot about that back in my Crystal days. And they made different decisions that I think back in those days don't hold up as well as this does in by any stretch of the imagination. But also the concept of momentum and how you move a 3D character that you can see, separate from first person, right? Which was, with Quake coming out and stuff, was starting to get more perfected. This was still on the cusp of how do we move a character with a 3D camera in 3D space that I can watch and see the animations, and how responsive is that, and how much does animation take over the perception of what's happening versus what feels good. Do you know what I mean? And with Mario, they have a good out because it's a fantasy stylized world, and so the fact that his animations don't always line up the way that footfalls would in real life is okay. But in Tomb Raider, that was probably a debate,
right? Or Soul Reaver, another game that we played where we explicitly talked about that, about how much the animation drives how much you move versus how much your control inputs directly drive how much you move.
Exactly. Yeah. There's this translation that happens there that I don't feel like with Super Mario World, there was a need to be a slave to that as much, right? Like it was more just about his hitbox overall, you know what I mean? Versus did this foot land or are the animations, maybe I just didn't get good enough at Super Mario World, but I never really took much from a telegraphing standpoint from the animations of the sprites. It just was giving me the general information I needed to know that I was moving forward or jumping or landing or what have you. But here, he leans into things. They've got some nice effects on his, like dust effects on his when he starts running and landing and things like that. And
the shadow circle as well.
Shadow is, I put down on one of my notes too, when it comes to, like a critical underappreciated element of 3D games.
Yes. Absolutely.
People think is related. I think a lot of times people think shadows are related to realism or something. But actually, it's really important for depth perception. But so that was an unexpected transition for me, but the camera for sure, it still holds up in general. And I think you can see some of the things that they were experimenting with. And maybe I'll quickly tell that story here.
Yeah, go ahead. And then maybe we'll talk about camera.
Yeah. And the I guess the overall, I'm going to butcher the story because I don't remember the details, but what Fred basically had said when we were talking about 3D camera.
Fred at LucasArts with us? I feel like he was.
He was at LucasArts with me in my second tour of duty there, but he wasn't when you were there. Yeah, this was late, toward the end, just a few years ago, 5 years ago or so. He's ex Ubisoft and French gentleman, and I always joked with him because he's a short French guy that with white hair, but he looks kind of like Mario, but with white hair, and he has a mustache. And I always like to joke with him about it. Anyway, Fred was a real smart designer, and he basically talked about, and I believe this was conversations that he had because he had been associated or worked with Nintendo in some fashion. I forget how. Anyway, when they started developing this game and they were trying to figure out how to crack the 3D camera nut, I guess what they did, and this is, I think, is a public story, so I don't think he's revealing anything. I think they've talked about this before, and you may have heard about the rabbit. Have you heard about the rabbit? Does that ring a bell?
No, I don't think so.
Well, they created, and maybe this is in the game someplace as well. They left it in so you can actually see it. But one of the first things they did was they created this maze. It might have been a hedge maze or something, and they put this rabbit on a course running through the maze. And basically what they did to design the camera, at least one of the things, is they basically, before they had any camera understanding of what they were going to do programmatically and sort of camera design wise to control the camera, they basically just ran ran courses as Mario was trying to follow this rabbit through this maze. And the goal that I guess Miyamoto had set up, and this is probably like fourth hand at this point, so I'm getting it all wrong, but I guess the goal that Miyamoto said is you need to be able to follow this rabbit through this maze, and the camera needs to be able to, view Mario and the rabbit at all times. And so you're pushing. So if you imagine a camera that's doing nothing, right? They have no idea what they're going to do with it. And then you're just chasing this, and then you go around the first turn, and of course the camera breaks. So it's like, all right, how do we solve that? And then they solve that, and then they go around the next turn, and then he turns, you know what I mean? So just this kind of little test bed of a very simple concept that we've heard stories over the years that Nintendo's really good at. They don't try to overcomplicate how to solve every problem at once. They take one simple scenario, from what little they've told us about how they do things, and then just try to perfect that one scenario. And I don't know, I always took that away as a really interesting, taking a really impossibly hard problem at the time that I would say a game like Tomb Raider kind of just punted on, right? They just basically tank controls, put it on the player, tank controls, and otherwise you can control it yourself if you get it into a bad place. There's some camera collision, but usually it's messed up. And they just, and then just good luck, and the game is punishing.
And if there are spots where you can get to that you can't get the camera in a good spot, well, I guess you're going to be jumping blind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The camera will go into the head of the character, and it just, they just kind of punted because it was the frontier of this, but Nintendo didn't do that. They tried not to, right? It definitely breaks a couple, sometimes, but there's more going on there. And I actually have to admit, I really tried hard to analyze every bit I could last night when I was playing. And there's just so many things happening with this camera all the time. It's really hard to dissect. But anyway, that's so what's been your, how you've admitted that the 3D Mario games have been the closest to your heart, right?
Throughout. Absolutely. Right. And although I've never actually finished this one, largely because when I played it, I was playing on the company or the team's Nintendo 64. I think Darren Stinnett had brought his in. It was just plugged in, and I would sort of pick it up and play for a while. And I definitely never got. I didn't finish it. I got quite a ways in, I think. And there were things that we'll talk about in a later episode about the design that I definitely picked up on at the time. But I would have been playing it in 1998 and already started to be a little bit more familiar with these sorts of things. And even some of the 3D camera stuff is in, for example, Starfighter. You talk about following the rabbit. Mm-hmm. There is a sense in Starfighter of not only circling the craft, but also slowly bringing you into line with something that you're following, even if you're turning. So that you drag a little bit as you turn and things like that. It's something that you can definitely feel playing even a flight action game. Mm-hmm. And even racers, I think at the time, excuse me, like Wipeout would have been out right around this time as well. And some of that stuff you can see there, but to do it so fully is pretty amazing. So my own history is I've played Super Mario Sunshine to completion, much maligned. I think it's probably better than people give it credit for, but not among the best few. I've played all of Super Mario Galaxy 1 and gotten all 151 stars. That is the most I've ever dived into a. Yes, I can tell you some of those. It was good to be off, not doing any work for a little while, because right. I could just for a week just work on this one thing that I had trouble with. Nothing took me a week, but there was one level that just took me hours to get good enough to do. And of course, now I'm playing Super Mario Odyssey. I'm sure I'm missing something else that I've played.
Galaxy 2? Did you play through that?
I have Galaxy 2. I've played a little bit, but I have not finished it. Yeah. So I actually jumped right into Galaxy 2 after finishing Galaxy and played a little bit and was like, no, you know what? My thumb's in your break. I was pretty exhausted. In general, I have played a lot of 3D platformers. I am very fond of Rayman 3 as well, which I want to say came out in 2000 maybe. It was on the PlayStation 2.
Hmm.
And I've played 3D
Sly
platformers.
Cooper, I feel like we.
Sly Cooper is a game that I reference. It's sort of a platformer. It's a lot more assistive. It's more, I
Yeah,
would
that's fair.
probably put it more in the action adventure camp than I would directly a platformer, although it has
Yeah.
some platforming elements. It's much more about, oh, I know I'm going to jump and land here. It communicates a lot about exactly where you're going to land and makes you feel more like it's more about the thief fantasy than anything else. But also the Ratchet and Clank series, I absolutely adore and have played to death. I've played the first 3 twice, once on the PlayStation 2 and then again on the PlayStation 3. And I recently played the PS4 one, and I played all the PS3 ones that were PS3 native. So that's another series that's a 3D platformer. So they're a bit in my blood. Those are, again, action platformers. They have weapons and things that are a little bit different, but there's a lot of platforming in them. And it's funny going back to this, and I agree with some of the pre-show talk that the camera is not really fully refined. There are times where I feel like I'm waiting for it to catch up, and I kind of fall into the habit of saying, oh, okay, I've done a thing. Now let me just wait till it gets into place so I can see what I'm doing, as long as I'm in a place with no danger.
Do you use the yellow,
I do use the yellow, well, what would have been the yellow sticks on the Nintendo 64 controller. I think it was the C. I think they called it the C stick or whatever.
Well, that was, yeah, I mean, I'm playing on N64.
Oh, you're playing on an N64. That's right. I'm playing on the Wii, so I'm playing
the buttons. They're just they're the four.
Oh, it's on the buttons.
Buttons. They're yellow. And basically on the GameCube, they added in that C stick, that weird C stick.
Oh, okay, yes, that's what I'm confusing it with. I'm thinking of the GameCube stick. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, wow. That's a little bit trickier.
Yeah, it's very odd because I worry sometimes that I'm overcorrecting by like micromanaging those too much, like kind of trying to predict what I want to see, and I think maybe I'm not trusting the game enough. I need to test that theory out and just not touch those ever to see what happens. But
yeah, I feel like the one thing that's probably the most useful is being able to zoom in, because it basically puts it right behind him. And so sometimes I'll quickly zoom in and out just to center the camera behind him better.
Yeah.
More than I do anything else. I don't do a lot of left and right because the camera will correct, like I said, if you sort of take these pauses. And I think that's really useful. I think this is a little bit slower paced as far as 3D platformers go for that reason, that they know that this is a new thing for you. They know you're probably going to fiddle with it, and just like you're having an experience of not really knowing how much to use that, they're letting you take your time and not constantly putting you in harm's way in a way that Super Mario World totally does.
Yeah,
there's no time to breathe in Super Mario World, but you don't have to worry about the camera.
Yeah.
So
that's an excellent point.
I think they know they're splitting your attention, and they know that, and part of that attention is going to something totally new, and the other one is something that is familiar but still now has this added dimension. And so you're like you had pointed out, where the controls, you have to sort of relearn the feel of Mario in 3D. He still has a lot of the same elements, and a lot of the moves are very similar.
Yeah, I'm really, I don't know, kind of flabbergasted that they were able to emulate at least that momentum. I don't know what else to call it. I mean, I guess
that's exactly what it is. It's momentum with friction.
Yeah, momentum with friction, and but in a 3D space, basically with a completely different paradigm. Like that they were able to break down the core goals and pillars of that character movement and translate it. That 1 feat alone, that was just a big surprise. And I think the other one that you just hit upon that I actually didn't write notes down to, but I had the thought come to my mind while I was playing, is the levels themselves are way simpler than I would have thought they would have been.
Yes.
But
I think this is why.
Yeah, exactly. Especially compared to Super Mario World, but because it's really. But you totally are right, and you totally get why they would do that, because there's a bit of intimidation and just this overwhelming feeling on some of the areas. Like there's a couple precarious thin pathways you have to walk on that you're trying to really suss out, at least in the first couple levels. The depth perception, and a couple of them fall to your death, basically. So
Right.
it's really nerve wracking. But there's not a lot around it going on. It's just like, no, just walk down this plank. That's hard
Right.
enough as it is. Don't worry about,
right.
I'm sure that'll ramp up later. And to be honest, I dread that will probably be the case for later in this.
Well, and we'll talk about the structure in a later episode, because I think you're already seeing a glimmer of it here. But for now, I want to put a pin in it just for a moment, because the other thing that I think is really interesting about the camera, and we talked about this before the show, is that they introduce it by presenting it as a separate entity.
Yeah.
An artificial intelligence or whatever, a character who is filming the action, who for whatever reason is following Mario to work today, I guess.
They have like a news theme
announcing,
yeah.
Right. So they find this fictional way of why we have this camera. It's really amusing, because in the initial animation, where you start behind Mario, I don't remember if you even start behind, but you sort of swoop through the scene, and then the cameraman actually comes into view.
Yeah.
And actually, that's the point at which I went, wait a minute. If he's watching us,
well,
who's watching him? I had a very Margot Kidder moment.
They're brothers, I think, right? So maybe the implication
maybe
is that there's a second one there. Yeah,
second camera one and camera two.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
Well, now I'm feeling Mike Myers. Oh man, all kinds of film references here. Yeah, it is a weird choice. I forget their exact name, but it's like the Lakito brothers or something like that, and they're here to film today. And what I do like about that, though, is one, it gives a fictional representation of why this mechanic exists. And I think that actually aids with the controls a little bit. I think for people who are a fan of the inverted Y, this would be maybe not an inverted X, but they sort of explain, well, this character is moving to the left or to the right when you move the stick, rather than something that would break my brain, right? But that would be just as...
Oh, I see. You're saying they fictionalize how you control, or how,
right, that when you're controlling the camera, you're actually controlling the second person.
Yeah, behavior of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
So there's that.
It's
and then of course it's such a big step forward that I think, and we'll come with a couple other fictional and a couple other game examples, is I think that some developers like to make the choice of fictionalizing a new mechanic to make it more palatable to swallow.
Yeah. That's interesting psychological challenge, and yeah, I mean, you should share a couple of the examples that you thought of too with that.
Right. So one that's not too long after this that I thought of was about 2001, and is Max Payne, where you have, and it's just borrowing off John Woo movies and Hong Kong action cinema generally, but you're specifically building up Max Payne's adrenaline to be able to use, and when you go to spend his adrenaline, it slows everything down, because now he's more focused because he's got this shot of adrenaline. And then the other one is actually something I worked on recently, and I wasn't there at the beginning, but Tacoma introduces basically VCR controls into the animations and allows you to rewind and fast forward and pause these animations that you can see on the ship. And any other game after Tacoma can just drop that in now. No other game has to fictionalize it. Just like we didn't have to, well, we did fictionalize because we were in Star Wars, but we didn't have to fictionalize Force. I don't even remember what we called it. Force slow time? What did we call that?
Oh, I don't
Jedi
remember.
Star.
Yeah, I don't remember
It had a name.
I don't remember the final name of it. Yeah.
Right, but
you mean where
Force
you can slow down things?
Yes.
Yeah, the world.
Bullet time. Force bullet time in Jedi Starfighter.
The Force, you get a lot out of the Force, though, where it's like, Force
Exactly. Force anything.
lightning, whatever. Yeah.
Force, mind control, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want with the Force.
But with that transition of like something new, yeah, there's that, and I mean, maybe in a smaller example, like with our squad marker system, we kind of fictionalize these holograms that
Right. That's a great example.
was
This is
being
all in the helmet.
Yeah, that there was sort of an analytics going on with your helmet, and it was kind of, as the squad leader, you were kind of telling the squad what to do, and we didn't necessarily. It could have just been an interface. In fact, I believe, not to toot our horn on that, but I believe one of the military squad games after that had a similar system, and they used it. But then, of course, it was modern day, so there was no fictionalization of it. They just used sort of a marker.
Right, I remember that. It was a little bit more free form. I don't remember which game it was.
Yeah.
But they definitely borrowed that. It was, by the way, Force Reflex.
Right.
And Jedi stuff.
Flashbacks of naming those things. And
oh my God. Yes. Maybe another cast someday we'll talk about how you come up with names for stuff like that.
Yeah. It's a fascinating, I mean, this was, and we talked about this with Resident Evil probably, and maybe some with Soul Reaver, but this was a transitional time this is one of the biggest, I'm trying to think, we talked about this probably with those games too, but are there any bigger transitional eras for games than going from 2D to 3D? You know what I mean? I feel like such a big... We had,
maybe the only thing I can think of would be
VR's going through that,
like the sound card audio stuff,
way farther back,
where you could have basically recorded quality sound, instead of MIDI, and 8-bit or chiptune style audio. I think that was a huge deal.
Maybe CD-ROM
and CD-ROM, right? Greater optical storage is probably another big switch. But
color, I remember.
These are the three things. Sure. Expansion of color.
But this is like a fundamental, like any rule. But any rule that you had before for a given genre didn't work. You know what I mean? There were certain things that you could pull over from sort of a fundamentals and like very macro level, but I don't know. It's just you can see why some of this need for rationalizing your decisions might come to pass. And it's really, it's a fascinating point for sure. And I guess I'm really surprised and delighted at how committed they were to solving this camera problem. Again, using Tomb Raider as a counter argument or a counterpoint to that, right? Of how that maybe wasn't as much a priority, or they chose to do it in a certain way, and then they just kind of, that's a simple way, and they stuck to it. But just watching the camera do its thing in this game is just mind-boggling. There's it seems like a combination of programmatic ways that they're trying to dynamically figure out what's going on based on, say, an enemy that you're interacting with, or event-based sort of triggers maybe that are happening in the game to try to always frame that event or other character with Mario. But then there's also a heavy amount of level design, it seems, scripting and control based on the situation that you are in, whether you're running around a pillar or running up a spiral walkway, and having how the camera swings around the side of you to watch Mario run up this thing. You know what I mean? It's framed nicely to show you the balls that are kind of flying down at you, rolling down at you, to give you, and then sometimes it's behind you, and then sometimes it swings around the side. And that's a lot of work, to go in and really make sure that that's always tuned. And again, there's times that you can get it to a place that it doesn't quite work the way you want it to, but the ratio of success that at least in these first few levels that they had with that stuff is, it's just really admirable that they really went that far with it. So,
yeah, absolutely. There are other games that I think have done really extraordinary things with cameras. Prince of Persia and a lot of Ubisoft stuff after it kind of comes to mind. Actually, the Tomb Raider reboot, for that matter, had really excellent camera work. But for its time, this was really stood apart. I feel like we would be remiss to move on to the second half of the show, the feedback and stuff, without talking at least a little bit about the particular worlds and levels. I'd like to hear, first of all, how many, what is it? Stars? I forget already. Okay, so how many stars? Because it's moons and Odyssey. So
right, yeah, you're going back and forth. Stars and moons; those are easily confused. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, how many? And they're called shines in Super Mario Sunshine. How many stars did you get, and what was sort of your path? Path.
Well, I in typical form, I chose the wrong way to think about things. I think I might have done this in Super Mario World as well, where initially I start off when I miss something in the level. I go back and try to be a completionist about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so so that first bomb. Bomb world. I was convinced I was going to get all the stars without doing anything, without going forward on any other level, and so
which is not actually possible.
Yeah, it's not possible, and I don't even think I think even the third, I got 3 of them. I think maybe a 4th, but I have 3 of them. And the late, I just wasn't equipped and skilled enough, and it seems like maybe there's some caps that they keep talking about, these other mechanics that might help me. Is it like caps like in Super Mario Odyssey? Like, is there a hat situation?
You literally put on a hat, yes. Although in Odyssey, you use that hat as your weapon and you throw it, and it does other things that way.
Yeah.
None of that is here. Although the reliance on the hat is here in that you put on a hat with wings that lets you fly,
right?
And there are 2 others.
Yeah. Anyway, so
I'm sure we'll get to those later.
So I focused on that first world probably too much, but I had fun doing it for sure. There's definitely struggling with depth perception with the game so far, because I have that already. I shared on the Super Mario World just this anxiety with platformers, because I don't. Again, I talked about this in the Super Mario World series, but I have some psychological inner demon that I'm struggling with again about why platformers, and the 3D aspect of it hasn't really helped me much, about why platformers are so intimidating to me versus other genres, which I typically am.
Your father didn't jump and skid off a cliff or something.
No, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I think the combination of it's just my skills and the timing based elements, and then in some of the worlds we played this session, the gravity, no pun intended, of the situation where you can really, you miss a jump and you're down and you fall to your death and you're out.
Right.
Like it's just very digital sometimes, even though this is much more analog than say the 2D games. But anyway, so I got 2 or 3 stars in that first world, and then there's okay, I have enough to go try these other ones out, and so I dabbled with the others. I don't even think I got a star at all in the snow world, maybe 1, because I kept sliding and falling off of stuff, and just really the physics
I'm not a fan of those, but yeah.
Yeah, the snow physics of that stuff, I'm just not good at that. So that's super intimidating. So I left that one. I got 1 star in the undersea worlds after I got 3. And then the block, what is the block world where the guys,
right, where there's the big block at the top.
Yeah. That one I got 2 or 3 in there. So I ended up getting 8, but I actually didn't get to the key where we were supposed to get to, because I think I'm in that Bowser level right now, doing that level, and I probably played it 30 times last night.
Oh my.
Just trying to, because it has that, it pulls back, right? And that's if there's anything that they're trying to get closer to that 2D mentality, that level reminds me of it the most, because there's it's tracking the side camera view of you most of the time. You know what I mean? where you're running that course, and even though you're kind of winding up and down, there's a little, it's like a medium shot, and it's a lot more of a intense linear. The other worlds were a lot more playgroundy, which I liked. I did, using like the backflip move to get higher and kind of skipping some sections by doing some clever moves. I really enjoyed that kind of playground aspect of it. But that level is like linear. You gotta pretty much do, hit all the jumps, and I just fallen. I'm just not hitting the jumps, and the stakes are high. Luckily, there's no freaking timer in this game, which thank goodness.
Right.
I'm sure there will be at some point, but
I've definitely played games in which there's a timer for intricate 3D jumping, and
oh man,
cursed the designers' names. I usually bowl through it, but yes, I actually had kind of. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, oh yeah, there's that whole lead up to get up to the top there and fight Bowser. Ooh, sorry that's so rough for you. But
maybe maybe it's 20 times, but it's more than I, and that's why I stopped. It was getting late, and I was like, well, and it was probably 2.5 hours in that I'd gotten, so that I stopped. So
sure,
I'm not great at it. I'm having fun, and I really enjoy the translation of the what 3D gives them to be able to play around with, like I said, the playground aspect of the levels, which I know there's some of that in the 2D games, like with Super Mario World, like where we talked about, because you can go backward and forward in that game, you can do some exploration, and really discover some secret rooms and stuff, but it's not really what I mean. In the 3-dimensional aspect, you can imagine them talking through the design of this and how fun it must have been for them to kind of unleash Mario in this way. You know what I mean? Where it's like, well, I can go 360 degrees, and I can, and the level design opportunities that opens up for them, that it sounds like Odyssey just completely blows out of the water in cool ways too. In a modern example, and it's just, for me, being a more, I guess I'll say, analog fan of analog gaming, I love that aspect of it, because I can approach things from different ways and not, and actually fail a little bit and not feel as punished as I feel like I did in the 2D game.
Yes, and it is, I think, often more forgiving. And you're right, in the levels where it is a little more constrained, there's just all that room for error that you didn't.
Yeah, right.
That you didn't have before.
Yeah, I wasn't training myself up for it. So I think that's why I hit that wall there. So I assume Bowser's at the top of that section that I'm trying to play right now. And is that where I get the key from him?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. It's that star door that you can open with 8.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in that. Yeah.
I think I got 15 coins, although I tried to play it. I tried not to play it in that OCD way. I tried to play it as a naive player. Mm-hmm. So I went in the door that you could open for free, and I got 1 coin. And then I went and was like, oh, what else can I do? Oh, I can open this other door with 1 coin. Oh, that's cool. And you sort of learn from that the language of the level, the castle level of, oh, okay, I need to get a certain number of stars in order to open these doors, and the number's right there on the door. It's nice and clear and clean. And they do constantly tell you things like, oh, you can come back. And the names of the level challenges are a hint for what to do.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and the other thing about the loop, the macro loop there, is when you get a star, they poop you out of the level. I mean, that is,
you're not just going on to the next challenge.
Yeah, that's an intentional choice they made to get you to reset yourself and reset the world probably too, but they didn't have to do that, so they're trying to get you to explore. The structure of the game is fascinating. I remember the hub and spoke element of it. Generally we talked, about it, and I think a lot of teams did it. I'm sure Banjo-Kazooie was influenced by this game
absolutely,
quite heavily. But I did forget about the sort of lock and key mechanisms you're talking about when it comes to numbers of stars. And I thought at first that when you got stars and you opened a door, you were expending those stars, but thank goodness they're just additive. It just means
you must be this tall to ride this ride.
Oh, because when I found out that was a sigh of relief, because I was going to be in trouble if that were the case. Right. Because I only got eight stars.
That allows them to gate difficulty as well, in that they know you've spent a certain amount of time. Later we'll have doors that are 15 coin or 15 star doors or whatever. I don't know how high the numbers go. I know to get to the very end of the game, you need 70, I believe.
Oh boy.
To get to the, oh boy. But at that point, they know when you're up to that level, you've spent a significant amount of time and your skills are probably quite good.
Mm-hmm. Let's hope. I mean, we talked about this with Super Mario World, but they are the masters of onboarding, right? And ramping players up into learning certain skills. And like, for instance, the bomb boss guy at the top of that, I'm assuming, the concept of getting behind him and picking him up and throwing him, very simple thing. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's a core thing that you do a lot of in the future. And
absolutely,
they show you that, early on with that boss. And they're
and with the block boss who you need to taunt and then run around and jump on the back of. So they are teaching you that the 3D position stuff really matters, and they're reinforcing that with the boss battles.
In a very slow and steady, simple way.
Yes.
Which is
they're not even being very explicit most of the time. They're not coming out right and saying, "Oh, hey, do this."
Yeah.
You sort of have to learn from the other rules you've seen in the level. You've seen, those other smaller blocks that maybe have done a little bit of damage to you. There's also the damage wheel, which is a thing we didn't talk about, which is also very forgiving as well. So I think we'll talk about that.
Damage.
Except for fall
still
damage.
Blowing my mind that they even have it, but I guess I get it for gating purposes. But yeah,
right. But I think we'll talk about things like that later on. But I do feel like just to make a note of it, it's worth saying that it also makes it a little easier to jump into this game than it did to jump into a 2D where you basically had 2 health points if you picked up a.
Yeah,
whatever.
That's a fair point. Yeah, you get some more analog. Yeah, and we should talk in the future. I'm sure we'll talk more about bosses, but they kind of had to rewrite the book on bosses for them because they had, with the 2D games, they had to set up certain paradigms there that they would reuse. But here they kind of have to reteach themselves as well as the player on boss design in 3D space. And everyone's ripped that off over the years too. So.
All right. Well, we will think about those topics for the future, but for now, I think we'll take a quick break and then come back and do some feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We have a few bits of email and stuff, but before we get into that, I want to hear about your theory about Silent Hill 2's red squares.
Oh, yes.
Is this a communist thing?
No, it's much more on point of a theory than that. So I noticed my clue on my Google search for this answer was if you may remember, when you save the game, once you in Silent Hill 2, and you activate one of the red squares, it goes to the save game screen, and on that screen it has a red background. Mm-hmm. In that background you see your reflection. You see James' reflection, so it's got a glossy kind of mirror look. And so I did some research on the concept of red mirrors. And apparently, semi-mythologically, I guess I'll expand it and add in some of my own commentary, because there's like, for instance, there's like a Yu-Gi-Oh, that card, that Japanese card series. There's there's a red mirror card that I think is from Japanese mythology, potentially. There's also randomly, one of the other things you find in the search is a German death metal band that has sort of a mythology around their sort of the fiction of their albums, and a red mirror apparently is associated with summoning demons or a portal to another realm kind of thing, and that red mirror specifically is sort of this connotation of
And if anybody was dealing with his demons, it's James
yeah,
Sunderland.
so that's where I kind of arrived at that. I was like, well, maybe these are mirrors because your reflection is there, and it's sort of a type of portal through his mind, or a portal to, as you had sort of surmised, a portal to this sort of psychological landscape of a world, So that was it. That was my stretch. Red mirrors.
I wouldn't say that seems very on point for this sort of thing.
This is the kind of stuff I
can
love.
imagine. It's funny because I remember looking it up specifically in context with the game to see if anybody had a theory, and I could only find a post from who knows ago, 10 years ago or whatever, saying this is the only element of the game that I don't have an answer for. I don't know what it is, and I know it must mean something. And I felt so bad for that person.
I didn't
chosen to spend their life in such a way, but
I didn't. I didn't look for red mirror references with Silent Hill 2. I should have done that, some a little bit that research. But yeah, if you're just looking for red square, Silent Hill, they don't obviously have any backstory to that. But yeah, I don't know. It was the reflection, right? It was his reflection that I thought that's an interesting choice. And then actually, a little bit more of a detailed test. If you look at the red squares in the actual game, in the actual texture, there is a gloss / not reflection, but it's shiny. The red squares themselves, so they could be described as having a reflective quality. So I like my theory. I'm sticking to it, and I made up my own headcanon for it, which I like to do.
I am very appreciative as a person who spent a lot of time thinking about the implications of various elements of the story as we played it.
Yeah,
I certainly am happy to have that particular niche filled.
Good. I'm glad I could have. Yeah, and we even mentioned there's that last. I think it's the last one you find.
The last one you find is 9. It's
9. Yeah, which I thought was an interesting little choice, but made me even more intrigued.
The big one in right. The number 3 is generally one of those mythological numbers that comes up a lot.
Yeah,
and in adventure games.
Yeah.
So here we get 3 by 3. Maybe, who knows? Maybe something there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well,
there you have it.
Thank you. I'm glad we came back to that because when I did the production last week, I was like, oh no, he said to come back to it, and I didn't write it down.
I totally forgot. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's jump to email. You have the first one.
Yeah, I'm gonna butcher his last name though. Do you know how to
just vote?
Vote.
Vote. Yeah.
Okay. Mike Vote. Subject: XCOM Revisited and achievements. Hello, Dev Game Club. Thanks for your series on XCOM, especially your interview with Julian Gollop. When this game was first released, I was too young and impatient to get very far with it, so it was great to hear your take while learning about the game itself. When Firaxis announced the reboot in 2012, I was extremely excited and picked it up at launch. I played and enjoyed it for a good couple of weeks until my whole squad was wiped out in one poorly played mission. Sorry to laugh. I didn't handle this well, so I set the game aside and went back to something less punishing. This was always a game I wanted to revisit. And your discussions on the original helped put me in the right mindset and gave me the motivation to do just that. I'm now well into another attempt and enjoying the game far more than I did previously. Thank you for helping me get a new perspective on XCOM. Question this week has to do with the achievement and trophy system. As a player, I enjoy the extra incentive to really dig into the game and explore everything it has to offer. But too often I see achievements that go beyond this and seem to exist just to force the player to play the game in a bizarre and potentially unfun ways. So my question is, what is your opinion on achievements as game developers? Do they ever drive the design of the game in any meaningful way, or are they seen more as bonuses added in after the main design effort is complete? Thanks again for your great podcast. Mike Vote. Tall Timbers, Maryland.
Yes, Maryland.
Okay, got that.
Thank you for recognizing the state in which I reside. You can see that Tim sends me so much mail.
Who sends snail mail these days? MD. I don't know.
Your wife.
Okay,
Your wife.
maybe
Who sends me a Christmas
right.
letter.
She's in charge of snail mail. Right. Good call. Right. Post office. What's that? Yeah.
So the question about achievements, I mean, we did talk about achievements back at the beginning of our Resident Evil series. I looked it up this time. Somebody asked us somewhat similar.
Yeah, it sounds familiar. Yeah,
but not really on the design element. More as players, I think that was focused on. And as developers, my feeling is there's a real gamut. So I feel like there are designers and developers who just do the bare minimum, and I think you see this particularly in story games usually. For example, I'm thinking Firewatch, where as you finish each major story milestone, they just give you the achievement for getting that far, as if you were getting one for reading a chapter in a book, and there are no others. And taking to a total different extreme, some of the something like Uncharted, for example, Uncharted series, which has bonuses for a million different achievements, for a million trophies, for a million different things, where it's some for the story, but also using a certain weapon a certain number of times, and for every weapon that's in the game, and playing it on the levels of difficulty, and finding every knickknack, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I guess my opinion as far as a game developer goes, so I guess that was more towards the driving the design of the game sort of thing. I think that my opinion on them is I wish they were optional.
Mm-hmm.
At least on the consoles, they're not. They are required, and they are optional, however, on Steam, for example.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Or good old games or other PC platforms that have them. Yes, you don't have to. There is an audience, however, there who expects that they'll be there. So there is a certain expectation on the part of the audience that they'll be there, and they might write you up a negative review in that weird system that they have as a result. So there is a possibility that if you don't do it,
yeah,
you'll get dinged. And in fact, I read an article not too long ago on Kotaku or something about a developer who makes $1 games for Steam. They're all 99 cents or 99 pence, I think. And he explicitly makes sure he integrates every Steam feature into every one of them as part of his argument for his games is, hey, I'm totally bought into the platform. These are fun, silly little games to play while you're waiting to get into your MMO thing, or you get through the Dota 2 queue or whatever queue you're waiting for. Here's a fun, dumb game to play while you're doing that. That's going to not tax your system, so you can be playing that 3D game in the background or waiting for it. And part of his audience building has been making sure he has in Steam the achievements and the trading cards, I guess, are a thing,
mm-hmm.
and other elements of that.
That's clever
of that system,
because there's a lot of infrastructure with that stuff, with those badges and the cards, and people collect them, and they have their own specific rarity. You can get duplicates
and currency.
Yes. You can sell them and trade them
or trade them in for loot.
Yeah, it's a metagame, in and of itself, sort of, But yeah, that's
right. Which is why people force you to do them. It's part of the platform. It's expected that when you play a game, you have. I can remember the rare replay collection. Part of their selling point was that it had 30,000 gamer score in it. If you played all the games and got all the achievements and all of them,
that's right.
And that's a big part of that ecosystem for people who really bought in. And I happen to know one game developer who, as part of the interview process, actually will ask people what their gamer score is. Not because there's a minimum or there's not a right answer. You don't have to go in and say 52,383, but he's curious about your relationship to that, and it starts a conversation.
Right.
Anyway, how about the designing the drive or driving rather the design of a game?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess my approach and with I guess I do agree with him, and that too often they have. I feel like achievements have been used for the wrong reasons or in the wrong ways, and in as he put it, bizarre and potentially unfun ways, because they are trying to use this carrot to incentivize, and I typically don't like that approach and wouldn't direct the team toward that. I actually like, to be completely honest, most of the time they're something that is thought about late in development.
Pretty late, yes.
And so
That's been my experience.
yeah, I like to use them with the team, especially designers. I like to use them as sort of just a fun incentive at the end of the game to kind of think of clever, interesting things to maybe ask the player to do, but not not in a punishing way. It's like, what are
Right.
so it's not like, yeah, you have the obvious ones that are just like, play through the campaign or whatever, etc.
Sure.
But it frustrates me when they're too, and we actually, I think on Halo 5 specifically, we were guilty of a couple ones that were I think unfair. But in general, we were just trying to have fun with them. You know what I mean? And maybe have the player do some unexpected things with them, but not
right. That was exactly where I was going to go. Is my favorite ones, if I'm playing the first time through and I'm not going back to cross them off my list, because I do that. I'm a person who does that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I enjoy, and we talk about this as players in that earlier episode. I enjoy having a wink from the developer of, oh, I saw you do that.
Yeah.
I saw you do that thing that's not required.
Yeah.
Like, I can imagine. So if I were doing Silent Hill 2, I could imagine doing one if you just stayed in the bathroom and stayed in front of the mirror,
Mm-hmm.
having one that pops after 30 seconds that says, "Like the look of yourself, don't you?" Something just to notice that you've done something that most people wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And maybe it's easy and silly to get, and who cares? But those are sometimes the funniest, because that's like writing for an adventure game where you try to use some object on another object that you have a theory about, and the designer sees you doing that and has a specific funny thing to say about it.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, I feel like that's what those sorts of achievements are. Is they're very similar in that it's, we played our game enough to know the sorts of things that you might do, and picked up on them and put it into our achievement plan or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, they should be kind of exploratory and just fun to dabble in and to do unexpected things with, not really to punish you and force you to play in unfair ways that you aren't really into. Yeah, that's the ideal, I think, but we definitely don't always hit it. But yeah, I think unfortunately often they're just one of those things that are left till the end, and just because games are hard and all that stuff, hard to make, and I do appreciate the games that put more time and effort into them.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you, Mike. I have the second email. This is from Dan Doyen. He says, "Cool podcast," with 2 exclamation points. He says, "Hi, Brett and Tim. I travel a lot for work, and so listen to hours and hours of podcasts each week. Your podcast has become a mainstay in my regular rotation. Your insights are always interesting, and the warmth of your friendship and obvious enjoyment of each other's company is intoxicating." Whoa, buddy. Keep up the good work. One of my favorite parts of your podcast is how you were able to contextualize each game with the era of its release while discussing personal anecdotes and trends in the game development world of that era. I've been a gamer since the 1980s, and I can think of trends that frustrated me as a consumer. Most recent example is proliferation of randomized loot boxes in seemingly every single AAA game that was released in 2017, though there are plenty of others I could name if given the time. As a developer, what specific trends do you remember that you found particularly unfortunate but were required to implement nonetheless? And what can a developer do to minimize the negative impact of trendy, in quotes, mechanics or tones that don't necessarily fit with the vision of the game being made? Thanks again, Dan. I don't know if you have one. I thought of one I've had time. I read the email, so I actually have time to think about these things. So I have one in a game that we made. I wonder if you can imagine what it might be.
Oh, interesting. I have one as well that comes to mind, but I don't know if I can guess what. Oh, maybe I can.
Yeah, go ahead, give it a shot.
Well, I don't know if this isn't a trend though. This was an unexpected request, I guess. That it's not the humor in Republic Commando, was that it?
No, no, no.
Okay,
It
okay.
is Republic Commando, but it wasn't the humor.
No, then I don't know. I don't. Nothing's coming to mind.
Multiplayer.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's an excellent one.
So at the time, and I'll just give a little context. We were at the very tail end of the original Xbox life cycle, and at by the time we were about a year out from finishing the game, uh, wholesalers were stopping buying anything that didn't have a big Xbox Live stamp on the Xbox games because they knew the next generation of consoles were coming, and they believed, I don't know, rightly or wrongly, I don't really remember the market too much at the time, but that without an Xbox Live tag, meaning it had multiplayer support of some kind, was buying into the online ecosystem, that the games certainly wouldn't sell. And when I look back, and I had talked with this with Nathan Martz a bit at the time, when you look back at our reviews, a lot of the reviews of the time ding Republic Commando for its more or less vanilla multiplayer, which we were effectively forced by market forces to include, more than design forces. Now, originally, and I've talked about this elsewhere, it had co-op in mind, and I think that actually would have set it apart. But given the schedule and team that we had, that wasn't really achievable. And as lead programmer, it was my decision to kill that. A decision
Glad we have that
I
on air
would make
now.
the same. I would make that decision the same way again today, even though I regret it. So we just didn't have what we would have needed, and I think design underestimates the cost it would have taken upon them.
Okay, now let's calm down on. Okay, all right, we're not going to have that argument on air like we did so many years ago.
Oh, we spent so many hours on that particular conversation.
Yeah.
Hey, there. I just wanted to intoxicate Dan a little bit here.
Okay, all right, yeah, yeah. No, that's a good one. That's a
Yes.
huge trend. Yeah, especially in shooters, that was just like ridiculous in many cases. And I think
It hampered
we're not the
innovation.
only ones that you can point to with that in mind.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it hampered innovation in the space because you always had to force multiplayer in games where really the story was more the deal of the game. For example, I mean, I didn't play the multiplayer in this, but like Painkiller,
Mm.
that I remember as a game that had kind of an innovative weapons and maybe could have pushed some of its stuff a little bit further, but maybe also had to support multiplayer.
Well, like
I'm picking that totally at random, probably because I remember Nathan had played it. So
even a more recent, really random example that I always was flabbergasted by, and I will admit I didn't play it, but I don't know why. I don't think it was very popular. I don't know why you would seek it out. Is God of War Ascension, was it called? What was the last AAA one that was
right.
not 3? It was the one after 3. It had a multiplayer.
Yeah, I think it
mode
was
in
called Ascension. It had multiplayer. That's nuts.
Yeah, it's just like so, and yeah, and there's just so many examples of that. And we were a squad shooter. We were about the squad mechanic and about running through designed levels toward that end. And
Right.
we were shooters, so you can imagine what. Yeah, but we just we didn't. Yeah. So anyway, the example, the one that came to my mind is actually game length. Artificial expansion of game length based on adding repetitious gameplay or what have you. That's just always especially kind of in that same era where there was this certain amount of you better get your money's worth kind of concept, and what the number of hours,
this many levels,
the number of hours,
this many
back in the
weapons,
box. Yeah. So
Yeah,
scope
absolutely.
basically became this trend of like, well, you have to hit a certain scope, even if it didn't make sense for the game, and I really appreciate, especially in the indie space these days, because they're just, I think, braver than we are, to be honest.
Well, and there's also flexibility in pricing models now that we have a digital download space and things like that. I mean, I think there's a lot more factors. Back
Well,
then,
I would say braver in pricing model as well. Like I think
yeah,
AAA
sure,
should be doing more of that, and that's why I
I
definitely
I
applied
would
Ninja
agree.
Theory recently. But anyway, yeah,
Well, and actually, I thought about that recently with Visceral's closing. Not to drag all of that into it, but um, Visceral closed, and they were making basically trying to make Uncharted Star Wars, um, and you can't just jump in and do that and compete head to head with Uncharted. And what I would have loved that team to be doing instead was to make a short 4 hour game that
yeah,
was
to
15
test
bucks.
their metal on it. Yeah,
Figure it out, right? It was
yeah,
sort of a thing that you can do today, and could have proved out some technology and not had to really stress them out so much in crazy planning of a story that could last you 15, 20 hours or whatever it needed to be. I have no idea what their target was, but that sort of thing, I think,
yeah.
is something I agree with you, AAA should embrace. And what was the name of the Ninja Theory game? Was it Sensua? Is that
No,
the one?
no, no. I'm talking about the one that the one about the, it was kind of mental health theme, but it was this
Hellblade?
Hellblade. Yeah, the Celtic character, I think, in Norse
It's called
mythology.
Senua's Sacrifice. I'm sorry, it was
Oh,
not
okay, yeah, that's where
Sensua.
you're right.
Senua.
Yeah, Hellblade is what I was
The
talking about.
subtitle,
I think
Hellblade.
it's
Yeah.
$30. Ninja Theory scale, AAA quality. But just yeah, just that just isn't happening enough. But hopefully it'll trickle in there. It's just
Yeah, I think a game like The
studios
Order
need.
1886 might have actually had a lot better critical acclaim had it been priced at 25 bucks.
Yeah, that's
And
another good example.
because it was like 4 hours long or whatever, and I would have been perfectly happy to play something that gorgeous, and only pay 20 bucks for it or whatever. So
Yeah. Pricing is a related element to this problem. It's just the macro point of like the length of the game should be appropriate for the design, versus
mhm.
just saying there's this target you have to hit to make it feel right. And it has a lot to do with the genre. But anyway, that's one that came to mind.
All right, I gave you a second one. Sorry, this one's a bit longer, but go ahead.
Okay, you're crunching on something now. I see.
Oh, sorry, a little bit of ice.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Trying to soothe my throat.
Silent Hill 2 Making of, by Eric Kozlowski. Kozlowski? Yeah, I'm close.
Yes, I think so. Yeah,
Love latest.
if that is his real name.
If it is, I'm doubtful. Love this latest series, possibly my favorite game dev club yet. Silent Hill 2 is one of my favorite games, and you both brought up thoughts on themes I had never considered, the Angela Seductress in particular. Anyway,
Aha.
yeah, I'm still not sure. Anyway, I came across this video. Apparently, they intended to model in front of the TV. Wait, what? Apparently, they intended to model in front of the TV to be James.
The model
in
front of the TV.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
To be James.
Intended the model in front of TV to be James. It wasn't just a reuse of assets. Yeah. So
Right, and I'll put a link in the show notes. This is the making of video.
yeah, so there's some commentary going on there apparently. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I found that in that other video that fellow sent us, right, where they got control of the camera and kind of zoomed in on stuff.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, that's how, because you can't really get a good look at him.
That other fellow. Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't remember his name. Also, do you feel that playing the game on easy made the game less scary? I personally feel that when I played the game, I was in a constant state of tension, both from an atmospheric horror and the real sense of dread at the enemies killing me. It really kept me on edge for the entire game. For instance, people often talk up PT as being scary, and I agree. The first few times through the hallway is quite terrifying, but eventually you realize there are no consequences, no stakes. That coupled with the insanely obtuse way to solve the game, quote unquote, just sapped all the horror away from it for me when you see it over and over again. I feel like this can be true of the enemies in Silent Hill 2. If they're not a threat, the initial horror of their appearance won't scare as time goes on. Anyway, love the cast, even when you guys sometimes get facts wrong. Oh yeah, that happens all the time.
I'm sure.
Also, I can't believe you didn't talk about Akira Yamaoka's brilliant soundtrack more. 4 exclamation points after that. Probably one of the best game soundtracks ever. Yeah, we definitely should have talked about that more. We touched on it a little bit, but it really was a critical. I do
Yeah, it's
apologize and
funny.
agree with him. I think it's a
I
critical.
need to lean on you more about that because I'm a person who music just isn't a huge part of my life, to be honest, and hasn't been for a while. And I just don't listen to music really ever.
Mm.
And so music in games tends to fade away from me, which is sad, but it's a fact. I feel badly about it.
Yeah,
I just don't feel equipped to talk about it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
unless it really stands out and it makes me feel a particular thing, and I notice that it's making me feel that, I won't make a note about it, and we'll forget about it by the time we talk. Whereas mechanics and mood and themes are the sorts of things that really stick in my game developer craw, as it were, and so I do tend to latch onto those.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, I actually would say, to your point about mood and theme, like his music, I think one of the good things, especially about this genre, is, and it actually might be more so with a horror type genre game. The music is something that I think should fade away for you. It should, if it's done well, it should blend into the mood and the tone that is happening, and you shouldn't be thinking about it that much. That's maybe why and that's not a cop out of sort of like why we didn't talk about it.
That's a fair point.
But it really needs to support what's going on. And I do have some notes that I can prove to Eric. I did write down because there were really some moments where, and this was a very ambient soundtrack too. It wasn't a traditional score, quote unquote. So that's the other reason I liked it. It was minimalistic. So I agree with him. It's very, very good. And it really supported what was going on. I mean, it fit really well. They got that team overall seemed to really get what they were doing, together. Yes. And that is hard to do. It's hard to get a whole team
actually
on the same page.
That sort of fading away ties to me. It ties with me the same way to the difficulty. Actually, when I'm actually playing it, I forget that they're not a threat, like a mechanical threat. And I buy into the fact that this is terrifying.
Yeah.
And the fact that I'm not actually going to engage in the combat and I'm running away is not a factor of the difficulty. It's a factor of the creepiness and what I've learned, actually, as far as the light and all that stuff goes, with activating them. So
yeah,
I definitely found I had just as much tension playing it a second time as I did the first. And despite the fact that I played on a way easier combat difficulty. And I think that that's part of the... I'm a person who finds it very easy to step well into what they call the magic circle of a video game, of being inside the rule set and suspending disbelief, I guess is what you normally would call it in speculative fiction. I suspend all of that, and the actual mechanical difficulty of especially horror doesn't impact me. I don't know if you have thoughts about that. We can come back to PT in a moment if you do.
Well, I agree with you with this game in particular, for sure, that I feel like the game stands on its own quite a bit separate from difficulty, because I definitely was creeped out. In this particular playthrough, I chose easy because I wanted to make sure that I got through it, and that's an element of the podcast, and that's just kind of how it's something I have to consider because of my life, right. For sanity's sake, no pun intended. But so there is an element there. I do agree with him to some degree that I think if I were playing on a higher difficulty, especially Pyramid Head and some other enemies, I think I would have been more scared by, in a good way, because I don't think I died once from any enemy. And I feel like that I'd missed out on some from that, not because I wanted to punish myself, but just to kind of have some of that gravity. The other side of it, though, is this is not a jump scare enemy game like a Resident Evil. So I don't I also have this other problem when playing games like this is that I'm constantly analyzing. Just naturally, I can't stop myself analyzing the mechanics and the design of the game. And so when I figure out how an enemy works, you know what I mean? I'm just like, well, okay,
Yeah.
now I know what to do, and it becomes rote, especially like with the straitjackets or the nurses or something. You find that trick. Everybody does that inherently anyway, but kind of ruins it. But I think it's a testament to this game is that it didn't matter. I still enjoyed it. I still, to your point, I still was terrified. Just the atmosphere that they created was still very successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and this kind of edges into PT a little bit, is the thing that happens with combat in games is that if things kill you, then what ends up happening is you end up just repeating that combat, and once you do that, the combat itself becomes banal and it becomes impossible to be horrified by it. So I honestly think that with horror games, there is maybe a benefit to playing on an easier difficulty because you're never re-encountering things. And the ultimate shock in meeting Pyramid Head and having him kind of back you into a corner, even though you can fumble around and get your gun out and shoot him enough times to make him run away, and that's not difficult to do, the horror moment is already there. Because really the dread that I feel is, I'm going to have to replay this. And that's not an exciting dread in a way.
That's fair. Yeah,
And the way that ties into PT is, and there are a lot of jump scares in PT.
Well, so
there are almost never any stakes in any video game, really. I mean, what are you talking about when it comes down to it? I'm going to spend a little less time. I'm going to spend a little more time in front of this game rather than less, right? Is what it comes down to. So I don't know. I mean,
well, let me be even more specific though. Where it's not about making it the hardest difficulty to where, and I misspoke, and you're helping me refine my point, but it's not about dying necessarily, that's not really what I guess I should have said. It's about almost
you want to
dying.
feel the threat, the possibility.
Yeah, sure. And so I think the scariest moments for me with basically this comes down to what is the right difficulty for you. You know what I mean? Not putting it on the highest so that you're going to die all the time and that you're restarting, because I totally agree with you. That deflates the game in a totally different way. But if you find that sweet spot and of like almost dying throughout the game where you feel like, the nail biters, that is better, right? Because that's sort of that cinematic tension of like, oh, they just made it,
Exactly. And actually, so there's two examples there. One is one of the Resident Evil games actually does this. I think it's the one with Nemesis. I think it's called
3.
Nemesis.
Yeah, I think that's
right.
3.
Where I think there's a battle with him where literally you have to, this is mechanical. It's in the game and you wouldn't know it unless you played it more than once. But in the final battle, you have to basically expend all of your ammo. And then when you get down to that last one shot that you have, that's when you kill him.
Yeah.
And they put that into the mechanics of the game. It's scripted that way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you come in with 20 rockets and 1 million of this ammo and 1 million of that ammo, or 1 rocket and a handful of ammo of the other types. Once you get down to those last few shots is when you actually will kill him.
Yeah, they're trying to engineer that kind of thing.
They're engineering it, and if you only play it once, you wouldn't even know. And I'm perfectly on board with that.
Yeah.
The other example I was going to say, Final Fantasy 15. I actually played a boss battle recently. I think it's the first kind of major, maybe the second. You fight this gigantic Titan, and the thing should just squash you. And in fact, I was on the edge of death so long. And there's a mechanic in the game, in the combat, where you can block and parry. And it was just waiting for me to do that properly in much the same way. It was just grinding at me and lowering me just a little bit. So I was closer and closer to death. And there's kind of a 2-stage death mechanic. I don't want to go into depth, but at a certain point, I was failing often enough that I was like, I should have failed this already. Yeah. And it was so graceful that I still felt the tension. And when it still finally happened, it was dramatic. It was just as a game developer, I picked up on, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here. And I think that if I didn't talk about games all the time, I may not have picked up on it. And I was still really learning that block mechanic at that point to do it well.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think sometimes I'd actually executed it and it didn't let me, and because it wanted to drive me down to lower hit points to make an impact. The final point about PT I wanted to make is that there's this obtuse solve the game, he put in quotes, sapping all the horror away. I want to point out that PT, while game-like, is not properly a game in the sense that the eventual game might have been, because PT stands for playable trailer. And so what I want to point out is that the sort of obtuseness of the puzzle of figuring out how to actually get the little cutscene that you get at the end is part of engaging the audience so that they're excited about the game that's going to come out. So I understand why that's a little frustrating and counterintuitive, but I think it served the marketing goal for most people. Maybe not for you, Eric. So,
yeah, that's a fascinating
that was just
case study.
It is such an interesting experience, and what they did and designed into it. And of course, it's your buddy Kojima. So,
no, I'm my buddy. I wish you were my buddy, but I do.
You just got to get to know Mads Mikkelsen. But of course, once you know Mads Mikkelsen, you'll never look at Hideo Kojima again, because now you've got Mads Mikkelsen. All right, I've got the last one, and I guess we'll be quick because thankfully it has no question. We're getting pretty long. See, the subject of Silent Hill 2 is from Eric Shields, a second Eric 2 podcast tonight. It says, "Hey gentlemen, I enjoyed your coverage of Silent Hill 2, one of my favorite games. Wanted to point out another subtle detail that may have been overlooked since neither of you received the Maria ending. As James leaves Silent Hill with Maria, she coughs. I think he comments on it, but I interpret it as James beginning a new cycle of caring for a sick woman and his struggles repeating. Will he never learn?"
Well,
that's from Eric. Thank you, Eric. Yes, I was hoping I actually might get time this week to play that again and try to get the Maria ending, but I did not. So I was very appreciative to get that comment. It definitely reinforces to me some of the psychological stuff going on in that game.
Or does Maria just marry all over again? And it's not even just
right. Different. Exactly. Right.
There's this. We also missed that we won't dwell on it, but that scene where Maria gets killed by Pyramid Head right around the time you fight him at the end. We didn't mention that. That was a weird moment. Where she gets stabbed.
Right.
Anyway, whew, what a game.
Yes, amazing. Anyway, so that was all of the emails sent in this time to devgameclub@gmail.com. I actually have a separate couple of comments I want to make about Super Mario 64 sent to me privately by a friend of the cast, Kevin Kaufman, one of my producers when I worked at Bethesda Game Studios. And he sent on basically a history of Super Mario 64 speedrunning for 120 stars, which is full completion. And there's a great little 20-minute video describing sort of the main history of that. But then I think earlier this year, I'm gonna click and look it up here. It was under Patricia Hernandez at Kotaku. It was in June this year. There was a speedrun rivalry that heated up over the course of literally a couple of days, where nobody had beaten the world record for quite some time, and then somebody beat the world record, and then later that same day, another guy beat the record.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember.
And then the original guy beat the record again the next day. So within 36 hours or whatever, the world record holding of a speedrun that had not seen a lot of activity recently, although overall, as the history goes into, it's quite a popular speedrun. And so I expect email from Phil Rosehill with particularly good ones. Was kind of interesting. So I thought that was really really worthwhile. It's a very popular speedrun. Apparently, I'm not a speedrunner, so I can't really speak to that. But I wanted to thank Kevin for sending that stuff in. So thanks, Kevin. Thanks, buddy.
Awesome.
Catch you soon for breakfast. Anyway, I guess that's going to be it for us this time. It's getting to be the holiday season rather, and Black Friday's coming up. And I know you're thinking, what could I give Dev Game Club this year? And my answer to you is, hey, why not a podcast review on Apple Podcasts? We're looking for some more sweet 5-star podcast reviews, and we would love to have them from you. So if you got a minute, hey, go ahead and throw it that way. Instead of jumping on Cyber Monday, spend your Cyber Monday with us. Okay, that's all I got.
That's pretty good.
Thanks. This is off the cuff. Anyway, you can find us on Twitter. I am at Brett_Duville, taking a bit of a break, though I do check it from time to time. And he is...
You've ghosted in via our Dev Game Club Twitter.
I mostly go in and post there.
But taking a quote-unquote break, but you still taunt me from this other account. So, yeah.
Right, but I almost never do that from Brett Duville anyway.
Okay. At Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end is mine.
And the podcast, of course, can be found at Dev Game Club, as he mentioned. You can find us, of course, on the web at devgameclub.com. Please send us your feedback, questions, comments, etc. about Super Mario 64 or any of the games we've played at devgameclub@gmail.com. For now, I guess I'll head to bed and say good night.
Good night.